I'm Sergeant Schaller, and I will be talking about fuel testing today. I realize that as a pipeline company, we don't deal with fuel testing a whole lot. Most of the time, it's going to be the engineers or whoever is issuing the fuel to us to pump through the pipeline. They will be doing the testing, and then whoever we are pumping the fuel to will also do testing. Typically, that's not something we deal with. However, if you deploy or when you deploy, many times we are going to be doing jobs that are not involved with pipelines. For instance, when I deployed, this was part of my job. I was dealing with aviation fuel. So what we have here is two of our standard fuel testing, well, typical fuel testing processes. There are three processes. You have your API gravity, which tests your fuel's weight. You can actually also use it to figure out what kind of fuel you have if you are unaware. We don't actually have one of those kits. You have your millipore test, which checks for contaminants in your fuel. So you might do you might have in your operating procedure that you do a millipore test once a month, or if you do a visual inspection and it is cloudy, you might do a millipore test to check for contaminants in your fuel. And the third test is your AquaGlow test, and that is checking for your free water in your fuel. If you're dealing with aviation units, you're going to not be able to issue if you have more than 5 parts per million. If you're dealing with ground units, you're not going to be able to issue if you have more than 10 parts per million. Anyway, this is your testing unit and your power supply. Obviously I have it already set up. These right here, that is part of this unit. And then these parts are part of the millipore test kit. The millipore test kit, I'm not going to go over the whole procedure, but the millipore test, this is your basic unit. So you can unhook this line, and this is how this unit opens up. This connector connects to your fuel testing port on whatever fuel system you have. You take this testing canister and you place it inside there with the blue cap where it says inlet. I don't know if you can read that. It's fine. Facing that direction, because here's your inlet. You close your canister up. Of course, pull off the red cap as well. Reconnect your hose. One side. Now, before you actually run the fuel through the test canister, you would flush the system. So this is just a bypass line. So as you flush it enough to get any particles or anything like that out of this system itself. Once you decide to test the fuel itself, you would go from flush, flip this lever, so the little arrow there is pointed at test. Now they recommend 3 gallons of fuel to be ran through the tester. That's company recommendation. However, they also state that it is not necessary to run 3 gallons of fuel through the tester, as long as every test that you do, you use the same volume of fluid. That will make sure that your test comes out, will be at an accurate account for your fuel. For the AquaGlow test, a couple things to remember with the test. The test pads and the calibration pad, always use the tweezers. Do not touch them with your hands. Do not do anything like that. It will contaminate the sample. So in this zipper bag, you have your calibration tools. You have paper towels. This is for your millipore test to check for the color of the pad and compare for contaminants in the fuel. So these are the tweezers that are in every kit. You will use these in every process that you do with this testing kit. Screwdrivers for calibrating this machine itself. That little hole, you use the screwdriver to calibrate this to make sure it's correct. And here's your calibration pad. So this calibration pad has a number on it, the 5.7. So the 5.7 is the number that you will always calibrate this machine off of. So when you're going to calibrate, you take this pad, tweezers, you place it in the bottom of the machine, numbers facing up. Now this dial here, remember this number was 5.7, so what you do is you take this dial and you run it to about 5.7 on this, on these numbers. Take this, slide it in. It actually has an infrared system where that it checks the pad with. So turn it on, and it is properly calibrated. It's at 0. Well, oh no, I take that back. Around. What you want to do is when you're hitting this button, oh, it is pretty much 0. You put the screwdriver in here. If I can feel where that's at. And you turn the screwdriver until the dial on the top is at 0. And now it's calibrated. Okay, once it's calibrated, you run that back to 1. Remove the test pad. Again, only using tweezers. And you are ready to test. So I will not be opening any of these test pads because they can be actually hard to get a hold of. But the test pad itself has 2 colors. It has a white side and a yellow side. So when you open this up, you do not want this to be open for more than a few minutes, a couple minutes, because any contact with air, your skin, especially if there's a humid day, all those things can throw off your numbers. So you want as little contact with these pads as possible with outside atmosphere. Anyway, when you open it up, it's got a yellow side and the white side. So the yellow side is a dyed, it's a dye that the fuel has a reaction with the dye. And that allows to find out how much free water is in your fuel. Anyway, before you use the pad, do a visual inspection. If there's any damage to the pad, if there's discoloration in the dye, if it is not just a solid, consistent yellow color, you don't want to use that pad. So you would open this pad up using the tweezers. You would put it in this. Now, if you remember, I mentioned the fuel testing port. Same fuel testing port is used for both of these test systems. You put it into the fuel testing port, and you would have this pad. You put that the pad in this side right here. Now, the saying is sunny side up. So what you do is when you put the pad in here, it is yellow facing up. The yellow is facing the inlet side of your testing device. Now, before you do that, you would want to flush 1 liter of fuel through this system to make sure that all contaminants are out of it. And you just put it in this bottle right here, or this is 500 milliliter bottle. But you put it into a container, and then you would put the container into a bad fuel container. You don't put it into a fuel tank somewhere. That's just making sure that contaminants are out of the system. So using the tweezers, you put the pad in sunny side up. Put it into the fuel testing device. Hook this all up to the fuel testing port. Make sure there's fuel flow to this. You want to use fuel that is running. So you would have your pump running. Whatever, if you're using your testing Bag Farm off a pump, testing Hemet, testing whatever. You want the pump going, you want the fuel to be flowing. Open up the test port, open this up. Now for the testing process, you will flush 500 milliliters through that test pad. Once you have your 500 milliliters, close it and don't open it yet. You would take this so that there's no contamination from humidity or whatever else. Take this to wherever you have your testing device. So then you would take out your pad. And you would do a very similar process to when you're calibrating. You open this up, and if you see a blue glow, maybe you don't see it. All right, well, there's an infrared light in there that is important for the process of testing. So this time, when you put the pad in, you do sunny side down because you need the dyed side of that pad to face the light for accurate testing. So once your pad is inside the tester, you would hit this button like you did during calibration. And as you go, you start moving this dial. And you move it until the 0 on the dial here, obviously because there's no actual pad in there and fuel being tested, is off. But you would move it until this dial is at 0. And whatever number corresponds down here, say it's at 4 right now. This number is 4 parts per million. Now you notice, I said before with aviation units, 5 parts per million. So if you're right there, you cannot issue to an aviation unit. If you get a higher number, you can retest again, make sure that you have gotten an accurate reading. You could do the test a couple times, make sure that you always can come up with a consistent number. If that is the case, then if the parts per million is too high, then you shut down operations. Recirculate fuel, try and get that number down, or sometimes the required steps are to send in a sample. That's not all the time, but you might have to send in a sample to somebody else to see why fuel content is so high. I know from experience that sometimes these systems, you think that they're completely sealed, but sometimes they pull moisture into the system from the area surrounding the system. We did have issues with that. So that is the basic fuel sample procedure. After you have your pad tested, you would take that sample pad, put it back in the envelope that it came out of, and write on it how many parts per million, date, possibly time. That might be part of the procedure itself. But after that, file it or do whatever the ROE calls for, and that is your fuel sampling process.